Okay. For the 4th years, this is the environmental official, and in today's lecture, I invite you to join me as we discuss on a very interesting topic called diapause. So, in most living organisms, there comes a time when harsh environments, conditions within the environment become very harsh. So in such cases, maybe you are talking of extreme cold or very high levels of heat, or at times when there is no water within the environment. So during such harsh environmental conditions, then most of these living organisms, they sort of enter into a special kind of resting, a stage in which they sort of begin to rest or begin to sleep. Why they rest or why they appear to be sleeping is so that they are able to survive either the extreme cold or the extreme heat or the reduction in the amount of water that is actually available to them at that particular time. So they reduce the levels of activity. They are not as active as they were before, so that they are able to survive these extraordinary environmental conditions that they've been subjected to. So the key idea in this case is like during normal inactivity that is caused by immediate conditions, diapause is a programmed process which starts way ahead, way before that bad condition actually sets in. So when you are talking of the presence of extreme cold, diapause will have begun being prepared ahead before hiyo wakati yenye baridi itaanza sasa. When you are talking of an increase in the amount of heat that is present in the environment, diapause itaanza mapema hata kabla wakati wenye hiyo joto itaongezeka. If you are imagining the extreme or the harsh environment to be drought, preparation for that will begin earlier if we are to refer to it as diapause. So if it is just the normal inactivity for the animal or for the living organism will occur immediately when those conditions begin. So when it becomes cold, the animal goes into hiding. That is not diapause. Diapause, the animal will begin to prepare early because it will sense that this particular harsh condition within the environment will happen. So itaanza kujipanga mapema. So diapause is programmed and it is controlled internally by the hormones and even genes of that animal or that living organism. So diapause is just not brought about by changes in the environment or changes in the weather. Ni kitu ambayo the animal programs, the animal's body, the hormones, the genes prepares for it ahead of time. Let's use this analogy just to make things a bit clear. Imagine you as a student, you know at some point that exams will come. So when you know the exams will come at a certain point of your a certain time within the semester, you can begin your preparations early, even before the date of the exams commencing is announced. So you are not beginning to prepare for the exams because timetable imetoka. Okay? Forgive about stima inapotea because as I'm recording this mvua inanyesha, so it's a bit of The lights are coming on and off, so I hope they don't interrupt with the visibility. So as a student, you understand that once the semester begins, at some point towards the end of the semester, exams will come. So kama hautangoja timetable itolewe before you begin to prepare for the exams, then you can think of that as diapause. You began preparing early, even before the date of the exam is announced. So similarly, diapause happens mostly in insects. Okay, so most of the examples we'll give in diapause itakuwa kwa insects. So similarly, an insect enters diapause in advance of the harsh conditions. It doesn't wait for the cold. It doesn't wait for the heat. It doesn't wait for the drought before it begins. But inaanza kujipanga mapema. Okay, so it does so because the internal biological control tells it kwamba at some point these conditions will change, so begin preparing. Okay, so it does the preparation well ahead of the onset of that particular harsh condition. So what are the stages? What are the stages that lead to diapause? So the first stage is induction. So induction is the preparation. It occurs much before the onset of the unfavorable environmental conditions. So because this occurs much before, then it means there has to be something within that will have to trigger that induction. Something has to switch on. Something has to make the insects to begin preparing. Okay? So certain environmental stimuli, what are called the token stimuli, those are what will trigger the diapause behavior. The stimuli themselves do not negatively affect any of the factors, but they signify that hapo mbele there is an impending transformation in the environmental conditions. So the token stimuli, they will just be used as something that signifies, as a flag to inform the insect in this case, because diapause happens mostly in insects, to tell the insect kwamba hapo mbele will have this transformation in this particular environmental condition. Possibly kama kutakuwa na baridi, it has now to begin preparing for the cold. Kama kutakuwa na joto, it has to begin now signaling kwamba there is an impending transformation and will have an increase in the environmental temperature. If ni maji itapunguka, it has to signify kwamba there is an impending drought. So the organism, in this case the insect, then has to begin preparing for that. So that is induction. And the next stage now is the actual preparation. Okay. So the phase of induction is followed by the preparation phase. During the preparation phase, ni kama ukiambiwa mvua inakuja kunyesha, utatafuta raincoat, utafute umbrella, utafute gumboot. You are preparing for that. So the phase of preparation is characterized by the insect storing some vital molecules. These are the molecules that it will need to sustain itself throughout the period of diapause. Some of these vital molecules include, for example, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Sababu itahitaji hizi as a source to sustain itself throughout that period of diapause. So there was induction. It has now prepared because the induction signal. Then once the signal came, it had to prepare. After the preparation, after the storage of those vital molecules, then the next stage is initiation of the diapause. So initiation is one of the most important phases in diapause. And during initiation, there is the cessation. Cessation, to cease, is to stop. Okay? So during initiation, there is the cessation of morphological development. The insect does not have any development in terms of its morphology. No increase in size, no growth. Okay? So the morphological development is actually arrested. It ceases to happen. A few other things that will also occur during the initiation stage is the change in color. Okay? There is also the release of some special enzymes. So some of these enzymes, in particular insects like the firebird, they lead to the accumulation of certain chemicals which will help in lowering the freezing point. Okay? So it is just beginning to do some things within the body of this insect which will help it to survive throughout the diapause point. Then after that, the next stage is now the maintenance. So maintenance is now actually what is happening throughout the diapause period. It's trying to maintain the living organism alive, okay? To maintain it, to keep it going throughout that particular diapause period. Okay? So maintenance is characterized by reduced metabolism. Kumbuka, within this particular diapause period, the organism is not active. It's possibly, you can think of it as sleeping. So haitembei kutafuta chakula, inamaanisha the molecules it stored, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the lipids, inategemea hizo. So one of the things then that is very important ni kwamba there should be a reduction in metabolism. Breaking down ipunguke. There is an arrest of development, embryological development. Okay? Then there is a very high level of increase in how sensitive that particular organism is to some particular signals. So some of these signals, the ones in particular, the ones that would prevent termination of diapause, it's very, very sensitive to those, to some of these stimuli. So during maintenance, metabolism is reduced. Any development, no growth, nothing, because chakula ni kidogo. So if you increase metabolism, hiyo chakula itaisha haraka kabla diapause haijaisha. If there is any development within this particular living organism or insect in this case, then that development itatumia chakula mingi, yet the insect is inactive, is sort of sleeping. Okay? Then now, after the period of maintenance, there gets to a level where now this diapause has to be terminated. Okay? So, termination just means the diapause is now coming to an end. So it can happen from within, but there are certain insects that will rely on an environmental stimuli, something from the environment, a signal in the environment. Kama ilikuwa kwa mfano, the temperature was low, then the signal in the opposite that will lead to the termination ni kwamba temperature itaanza kuongezeka. The temperature will begin rising. Then the rising temperature will be the signal, the stimuli from the environment, which will signify kwamba we now have to terminate diapause, because the environmental condition that had made the insect to go into diapause, it is changing, so you have to stop it. Kama ni maji wakati ya drought kulikuwa na maji kidogo, maybe it's now begun raining. Okay? If it was a low temperature, the temperatures have risen. If it was drought, possibly it's now the opposite. So that signal is what will now trigger the termination. But after the termination, what happens? There is the post-diapause quiescence. Okay. So during this, after diapause, that's why it is post-diapause. During post-diapause, the insect will resume development. But the resumption of development is pegged to how favorable the environmental conditions have become. Okay? So once the environmental conditions have become favorable, then the insect, in this case, which is the animal under diapause, can now resume normal activity. Okay? So the resumption of normal activity post-diapause is pegged, is attached to favorable environmental conditions. If the conditions are not favorable, then even at that particular point, diapause might prolong for an increased length of time. We've seen the stages. What about the features? What are the main features of diapause? One is there is a suspension of growth and development. Why is it that growth and development is suspended? It's because the conditions in the environment are not suitable. There is not enough food. Okay? The condition, the temperature is not conducive. There is not enough water. So the insect, the living organism, has to stop growing, has to stop developing. Okay? So the insect will stop growing, it will stop developing into the next stage. So kama iko kwa lava, itabaki tu kwa lava. It will not go into pupa. Kama iko kwa pupa, itabaki tu hapo. Okay? Then the metabolic activities will also slow down. You can stop growing, but you cannot stop the metabolic activities because the insect needs energy. Those metabolic activities continue, but only at a very low rate. The pace is very low. Okay? The other feature is the physiological rest. Okay? So the insect is just not inactive, but their body chemistry will have changed. The hormones that regulate this resting state to protect the insect cells and conserve energy. Okay? Hormones will be regulating this resting because it is resting, possibly it is not moving around searching for food. So lazima hormones itatolewa kuhakikisha kwamba energy that is being produced, remember metabolic activities have slowed down. So the amount of energy produced is also low. But the important thing to remember is kwamba the animal or the insect in this case is not moving around, so it does not need a lot of energy. Okay? Then the other feature of diapause is the internal control. Remember we said diapause does not begin when the environmental condition deteriorates. It begins early. Okay? It begins early. So it is triggered by internal signals. Such signals can include things like changes in the hormonal levels within the body. In some, it is even thought that there are genes which will initiate, which will turn on diapause. Okay? So it means then that diapause is triggered by internal factors, internal cues. But these internal cues are mostly influenced by environmental signals. So a signal in the environment leads to the internal cue to initiate diapause. Okay. So diapause haianzii nje, inaanzia ndani, but yenye inaanzia ndani will have been triggered by an environmental signal. Okay. So the process itself is pre-planned inside the organism. Okay. Something happens outside, then whatever has happened outside leads to an initiation of a plan inside the body of the organism. So the three main features of diapause: one, suspension of growth and development; two, the physiological rest. So it is not, the physiology is not stopping, it's only resting. Then there is the internal control, which means it is a process that is triggered by internal factors, even though those internal factors are influenced by environmental signals. Something like how long a day is, the temperature within the environment, the amount of water present. Those are the things that will trigger, will signal the internal cues to initiate diapause. So there are insects like the silkworms, mosquitoes as well, which will enter diapause during either winter or the dry season. Now, even if the temperature is still good for a few days, they will stop developing because their biological clock tells them the harsh season is near. So remember, the second point inasema kwamba the temperature in the environment might still be favorable, but these insects, either the silkworm or the mosquito, will stop developing, not because the temperature is not good, the temperature is still favorable. But why is it that the insect is stopping to grow? Because there is a biological clock, an internal control mechanism, which is telling this insect kwamba the harsh season imekaribia. So stop growing. Okay, stop growth, stop development. It is not stopping because the environmental condition at that particular point is unfavorable. No, it has stopped even if the environmental condition is favorable, but it is in preparation for the harsh season that is coming. The season is not harsh yet, but the season which is harsh is almost coming. Okay? So once it stops growing, it will take time until when the favorable conditions have returned. When the rainy season eventually resumes, then at that particular point, the diapause will end. Once the diapause has ended, then the normal growth, the normal development for these insects will continue. Okay? Let's proceed. There is something called hibernation. So how does diapause compare with hibernation? Okay. How does diapause compare with hibernation? Let's look at the feature. We look at three main features where the type of organisms where diapause happens and where hibernation happens. We will also look at the trigger. These are the main points on which to compare the two. Okay? Then we look at when it starts, and also we look at how reversible they are. So in terms of the type of organisms, then we see that diapause mostly happens in insects and in some invertebrates, while hibernation happens mostly in vertebrates. Okay, so that's one of the differences. The second feature on which we want to compare these two is the trigger. What triggers? Okay, what leads to the start of diapause and what leads to the start of hibernation? So the trigger in diapause is an internal control. That could be hormonal or could be genetic. But in hibernation, the trigger is the immediate external environment. So things like temperature, things like food shortage, water availability, those are what will trigger hibernation. Then when does both of these start? In diapause, it starts before the hatch condition, before that hatch season begins. Okay? But hibernation begins after the hatch season has begun. That is when hibernation starts. So diapause starts before, but hibernation starts after. What about how reversible they are? Diapause is not easily reversible until the right season. But hibernation can end once the conditions improve. So to summarize this comparison, diapause is a planned, hormone-controlled resting period in an organism's life cycle, which prepares it in advance for unfavorable conditions. Diapause is planned, hormone-controlled, and it prepares that particular organism ahead of the unfavorable condition. Then it means diapause will help the organism to stop growth, to save energy, and to survive until the environment has become favorable. Okay? So, diapause happens in two main types, okay? Depending on how the organism's life cycle is adapted to the environment. Those two main types are obligate diapause and facultative diapause. In obligate diapause, that one happens automatically in every generation, irrespective of how good or bad the environmental conditions are. So with obligate diapause, it is not tied to the environmental conditions. It is just a fixed part of the organism's life cycle. Okay? It happens like a programmed pause button, which will be occurring every year. With obligate diapause, ni kitu inatendeka in every generation. Haitendeki sababu the environment is bad. It doesn't occur in response to the environment. Okay? So obligate diapause is usually found in organisms that produce only one generation per year. Only one generation per year. We call these organisms as univoltine species. So those organisms that produce just one generation annually, hizo ndio zinapatikana ziki go through the obligate diapause. Okay? So you can think of obligate diapause as a built-in annual rest period, which happens automatically. Unaona things like trees, miti huwa it sheds the leaves every dry season, whether it's mild, whether it is harsh. It occurs automatically in every generation, irrespective of the environmental conditions. That is obligate diapause. So you can think of obligate diapause as an obligation for that particular organism to undergo diapause. It has an obligation to undergo diapause, irrespective of the environmental conditions. The second type is the facultative diapause. So this type of diapause occurs only when conditions are unfavorable. Okay. Facultative diapause happens only when conditions are unfavorable. Unfavorable conditions in this case could include cold weather, lack of food, a change in the photoperiod so the days are shorter. Okay. So while obligative diapause was obligatory, was a must, facultative diapause is actually optional. Okay. So it is mostly found in organisms that can produce several generations in a year. So you can think of facultative diapause as having a decision to turn off an engine when you're in traffic. Okay? So you only turn it off because umegwama kwa jamu na gari na hautaki kumaliza mafuta. Utazima, useme laini ikianza kusonga, nitawasha. Okay? Because you are doing that based on the conditions of traffic. Kama traffic inaenda haraka hautazima, lakini kama traffic inashikana utazima. So utazima tu because traffic, bad conditions in this case on the road have appeared. But they don't appear every time that you are driving. Okay, let's move on and now try to think of through which stages of life can we have diapause occurring. So mostly diapause can take place at different stages of an organism's life cycle. The different stages will vary depending on which species you are looking at. So we look at the life stages, we give examples of organisms in which diapause can occur at that life stage, then we do a brief description in this table. So egg diapause, the example of organisms that can undergo that, grasshoppers, mosquitoes. In the egg diapause, the embryo inside the egg will stop developing until good conditions, like is a bit warm, it is raining, until such good conditions have returned. Okay? It means it has stopped growing, stopped developing at the egg stage. The larval diapause, this one can be found, beetles and butterflies undergo this. What happens in the larval diapause ni kwamba the larva has stopped eating and growing. In that case, metabolism has also become very slow so that we can conserve energy. The pupal diapause, that is at the pupa stage. Here it happen in silkworm, in butterflies. In the pupal diapause, the pupa remains dormant. It does not transform into an adult until the environment has become favorable. So itaishi tu at the pupal stage. The last stage is the adult diapause. That one happens in the ladybird beetles and in locusts. In the adult diapause, the adult stops reproducing. It feeds less, or at times it does not feed at all. Then it also, in often times, hides in shelters so as it can survive the harsh conditions. Okay. So, an example in nature. In temperate conditions, in temperate regions, butterflies will spend winter as at the pupa stage, that is the pupal diapause. Then many mosquitoes may survive as eggs during the dry season. Okay. So kumaanisha wakati wenye mvua haiko sana, most mosquitoes will have laid eggs and their eggs will stop developing until the dry season imetoka. We'll see another explanation at some point. But what is it that can now trigger diapause? What are the triggers of diapause? What are the inducing factors of diapause? So as we've seen, diapause doesn't just happen by chance, but it is triggered by specific signals, either from the environment or from within the organism's body. The first category of the triggers are environmental or the external cues. So these are outside signals which tell the organism to prepare for bad times. Kwamba bad times are ahead, so begin preparing. Examples of these external cues include the photoperiod, the length of the day, for example. Shorter days usually mean that winter is coming. Okay? Many insects will use light, the duration of light to predict the season. Because normally, if you are dealing with a 24-hour day period, then you expect kwamba we will have 12 hours or thereabouts of light and 12 hours of darkness. But when winter is coming, then you begin to experience shorter days, so shorter durations of light. So when the insect inaanza kuona kwamba it is no longer 12 hours of light, but possibly 3 hours, 4, 5, 6 hours less, then itaanza ku prepare. Something triggers it. Kwamba, most likely, winter, which is associated with lower temperatures, is coming. So it has to begin preparing for that particular period. Another environmental cue is change in temperature. A drop in temperature, for example, will begin to send a warning that conditions might soon be too cold for activity. The food availability. If food becomes scarce, then an organism will be forced to enter diapause so as to save energy. The level of moisture in the environment. When the humidity is low, when there is a drought, then it can trigger diapause. So the first category are the environmental or the external cues. The second category of the triggers is the physiological or the internal cues. So these are signals that come from inside the organism and they help in controlling diapause. These signals come mainly in two forms. One, they can be in form of hormones. And in this case, we are talking of either the juvenile hormone or the ecdysone hormone. These ones help in the regulation of growth and development. So if there is a low juvenile hormone level, that can signal the body to enter diapause. Okay? With genetic programming, some species are programmed to enter diapause at certain times of the year. They obligate diapause, regardless of the external cues. Okay? So ikifika mwezi fulani, their genes iko programmed diapause. Most of the time, such species take this as an inherited survival strategy. Possibly hiyo wakati kunakuwa na kitu fulani, so it has to enter into diapause so that it can survive, it can escape whatever it is that is present during that time of the year. So think of it like this. The organism's internal clock and hormones, they work together to prepare for the sleep mode. The sleep mode in this case is the diapause. Okay? So what happens is that there will be diapause, but that diapause will be terminated at some point. So diapause ends when conditions become favorable again, or when certain stimuli would signal that it is safe to resume normal activity. So either the conditions have become favorable, or there is a signal, there is something that has sent a signal to the living organism in question, kwamba very soon, whatever condition in the environment that was inhibiting your ability to live life normally, that thing in the environment will be gone. So you can resume your normal activity. With that, then termination of diapause will occur. So what are some of the stimulus? One of the stimulus that can lead to the termination of diapause is an increase in temperature. When temperatures increase, it can easily signal, for example, the end of winter diapause. So it means then development has to resume as warmth has come back. If there is longer daylight hours, it indicates kwamba winter imeisha. If there is an increase in humidity, okay, then it means the diapause that was happening during the drought season has to be terminated. Okay. So tropical insects will begin to hatch, they will begin to grow. We have stimulus from within now, the hormonal changes. Okay. So the internal hormones, for example, if there is an increase in the ecdysone hormone within the insect, then that rise in the levels of the ecdysone hormone will lead to the resumption of a normal growth and development, and even the metabolism processes within the insect's body. Mara mingi wakati kumekuwa na kiangazi, unapata kwamba malaria hakuna. Lakini mvua ikinyesha tu, unaona mosquitoes zinakuwa mingi, alafu then all of a sudden watu wanaanza kuwa na malaria. So usually what happens is after the dry season, the first rains will stimulate the mosquito eggs. These eggs during the dry season, they were in diapause. When we were looking at the stages of diapause, we talked of the egg diapause. Na tukapeana an example of which mosquitoes can also experience that. So once rains begin, those rains, they are an environmental signal to kuambia the mosquito kwamba, the egg kwamba, you can now terminate your diapause. And once the egg has terminated its diapause, it has now to hatch. Okay? So that's why you have a boom suddenly in the number of mosquitoes in the environment. Okay. Initially they were held up as eggs, but mvua ikianza zaana, inaleta mosquitoes now in the environment. Okay. Does diapause have any biological significance? Okay. Does it have any biological significance? So it is important. Diapause is important in the survival and adaptation of many insects because it helps them to cope with the changes in the environment. Okay, so let's look at some of the main biological reasons why diapause is important. Okay. So one of the significance of diapause is that it is a survival strategy. A simplified explanation of that is that diapause helps organisms to survive harsh environmental conditions. Okay? So when the environmental condition is harsh, the organism goes into diapause. In diapause, it is sort of resting or sleeping, but it is not dead. If it does not go into diapause, it will likely die. Okay. So during diapause, the animal's body will slow down its activities. Growth, metabolism, all those will be slowed down. The importance of slowing them down is so as to conserve energy until the conditions have become favorable. We saw an example where the mosquito eggs can survive the dry season by entering into diapause. But they will only hatch when rains return. What will have happened if the mosquitoes hatched during the dry season? They will have died. But they have to hatch when the rains have begun falling, so that during that time, now the mosquitoes have environmental conditions that are conducive for their survival. Okay? The second significance of diapause is life cycle synchronization. So diapause helps to ensure that the developmental stages, things like hatching, growing, and reproduction, these stages happen at the best possible time. What we call the best possible time occurs or happens when food and environmental conditions are suitable. Okay? So when many butterflies, for example, when their pupa have entered diapause, that happens during winter. Why it is important that the pupa enters diapause in winter ni kwamba during winter hiyo pupa itakaa hivyo, it will not change into adult. But when winter imeisha, baridi imeisha, now the adult can emerge because the pupa diapause itaisha. Then the adult can emerge after winter. Sababu during winter, now there is enough food for the adult butterfly. But that food was not present during winter. So kama the pupa could have changed to winter, to an adult in winter, the adult will have died because there is no food. So diapause inasaidia in the life cycle synchronization so that the stage yenye the diapause terminates has to be in line with the available conducive environmental conditions for that particular stage of the organism to survive. Okay? The other significance of diapause is population regulation. So what diapause does is that it delays development in some, if not most, organisms. So by delaying development, diapause will help to spread out generations over time instead of all individuals reproducing at once. So you have different individuals being delayed in their development at different stages. If all of them will not have that delay, zote zingezaa wakati moja. Ikizaa wakati moja, we will have a huge number of organisms running after very few resources. That will lead to overpopulation, will increase competition. Okay? Then once competition is increased, of course, you know what happens. There will be death. So with diapause, that delay only ensures that all these organisms don't reproduce at once, but they will reproduce at different times. The importance of that, it helps to reduce overpopulation, it helps to reduce competition. Competition in this case is not only for food, space, but also even mates. Okay? The other significance is geographical expansion. So diapause allows species to live in areas with strong seasonal changes. So without diapause, many species will not survive long winters or dry seasons. Okay? So kama hakuna diapause, mosquitoes will not survive droughts. Because wakati yenye hakuna mvua, mosquitoes will undergo the egg diapause. Their eggs will cease hatching until wakati yenye mvua itanyesha is when the eggs will hatch. Okay? So had it been that they just hatch during dry season, then those will not be able to survive. The mosquitoes won't survive in the dry season. But because they only hatch when the conditions are conducive, the environmental conditions are conducive for them to survive and expand. Okay? So it makes the mosquitoes to survive, expand, and conquer other geographical areas. Okay? So diapause allows species to live in areas that have very strong seasonal changes. When it is dry, the organisms undergo a diapause. Their growth is arrested. Then when it is conducive, they grow. When it is not conducive, the growth is arrested. Okay? And with that, they can now survive either a cold environment, a hot environment, but they will resume development when the conditions are conducive for those organisms. So in summary, you can think of diapause like a pause button in an organism's life cycle. Kama unasikiza wimbo na mtu anaanza kuongea, what you do is you press the pause button. Kelele ikiisha, mtu akimaliza kuongea, you press the play button, you continue. So what diapause does that now, what it helps is that it ensures survival, it ensures timing, and it ensures stability of the species populations. Diapause also allows animals to expand their range into regions that have harsh seasons. How does it allow them to expand? It allows them to expand because when the conditions are harsh, those animals undergo diapause. Then when the conditions are conducive, the animals resume growth. If there was no diapause, those animals will not survive in the harsh conditions because they will die. But because of diapause, when the conditions are harsh, the animals' growth is arrested, they sort of go into some sleep. Then when the conditions are conducive, their growth continues, even in an environment that they would ordinarily not have been able to grow and survive in. Okay? So That is about diapause, which is a survival mechanism. Okay? Read these notes, listen to this video. Should you have a question, you can reach out to me. Otherwise, thank you, and I look forward to the next discussion as a team.